just me, or have Disney villains somewhat lost their edge? Since the beginning of Disney, since the rise of long-form cinematic animation, the villain has been an extremely important part of the formula, often even more so than the hero. Because for quite a long time, the heroes, often they had minimal personality. The generic golden age hero, they're a paragon of virtue and goodness, they strive to do the right thing, but they don't have much depth beyond that. And of course, that did improve over time, but I feel like the villains, they were always that important element that was written very well. Simply put, I think a well-written villain, a dastardly monstrous villain, is the best tool that Disney has to make their story compelling, their protagonist interesting, and ensures that even the blandest of characters can be elevated by a top-tier villain. And we've seen that a number of times during the Golden Age. I mean, just take a moment and look at the OG, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the film that started it all. Our title character, the protagonist, Snow White, she's barely a character. In actuality, she's more a plot device for everybody to interact with. The dwarfs don't appear themselves until a fair chunk into the movie, and then the prince appears at the start trying to flirt with Snow White and then becomes a non-factor until the end of the movie where he rides in, he takes all the glory and credit and leaves. And so it's really the evil queen that has to carry. And carry she does. She's evil with clear motives, dastardly schemes, a classic, the OG. She gives the other characters something to play off of, whether it's directly or just in the form of an ominous looming threat. Pinocchio, another classic of the OG Golden Age. That film also has a bunch of rather frightening and dark villainous characters. Monstro the Whale. My god, there is no reason that Monstro should be as scary to me as he is, but my goodness, when I rewatched Pinocchio, I think maybe last year, maybe the year before, the dude was frightening, Jesus! It makes you feel real peril for the characters of Pinocchio and Geppetto. And it's the same with the stuff that goes on in the Dark Carnival. That stuff, that scene, it's pure nightmare fuel. Even today, truly horrific. Mama! And it makes you fear for Pinocchio. It lets you suspend your disbelief that maybe, just maybe, he's not going to get out of it this time. Peter Pan has Captain Hook, who, whilst being a bit of a comedy character, is still dastardly and engaging. He gives Peter somebody to bounce off of, which in turn makes Peter seem heroic, which is especially necessary because Peter sometimes comes off as a dickhead in his interactions with Wendy a lot of the time. And so, through his interplay and banter with Hook, they turn him around and they bring out the best in his character. And really, that's a big part of the Disney villain. They bring out the best in the protagonist, either giving them narrative direction or helping to flesh out their personality. And I think it can't be understated just how important the villain's been to the success of this company's films. Take a look at the first dark age of Disney through the 70s. A lot of those films, they have pretty bland, unengaging characters, but especially villains. They don't do anything to enhance the storytelling. And yet, when the company really started to pick up steam and became the mega power of the animation world during the 90s, well, there were some common elements across the majority of their super successful films. They obviously really upped the quality of the protagonists, like significantly. There was more personality, more heart, more fun, more humor. They improved them across all aspects of their character. But what else did they have in abundance that really made their movies stand out? What else served as a staple of the Renaissance era? Well, apart from absolute banger soundtracks, there was also some truly well-written villains. And not just well-written. I'm talking dastardly, hateable villains. There was no redemption arcs to get bogged down in. You didn't need to try to understand where they're coming from. They were just straight-up bad guys, there to enhance the story, particularly the protagonist. And like I said, these villains, they run right through each of Disney's classic movies. Ursula, the Sea Witch, from The Little Mermaid. She's a spiteful, wicked sea witch who plans to manipulate young Ariel into giving up her voice so she can use it as a bargaining chip to get King Triton to give up his trident so she can take over Atlantis. And at the same time, she tries to screw over Ariel and prevent her from having her happy ending with Prince Eric, and even tries to kill her. Completely awful. And yet at the same time, she's charismatic, she's exciting, and she plays off of Ariel so well as a result. She's hateable, and you want to see Ariel overcome her, and her manipulative nature really contrasts well with Ariel's sweet naivety. Then you have Beauty and the Beast, where Gaston, the loud-mouthed, violent, and cruel braggart, serves as a perfect foil to Beast. On the surface, Gaston is the perfect dude, and the Beast is not. But over the course of the movie, their true natures revealed to be quite the opposite, which in turn leads into their final violent confrontation. You hate this guy because you think Belle deserves better than him. And you also want to see Beast kick his ass. It gets you invested. Then there's Aladdin. He's the poor boy from the streets. He wants to live his dream, win the love of the princess, prove himself worthy, better than what he was, more than a street rat. Versus Jafar, an old creeper who's willing to do anything to gain power and prestige. The Lion King, an uncle jealous of his brother and of his nephew, who despite living a pampered life wants more and more and more. And he tries to have them both trampled to death, and when that doesn't work, he throws his brother off a cliff and sends goons to tear apart his nephew. What a swell guy. Then he runs the kingdom into the ground and ruins the land whilst he gorges himself. Completely self-absorbed, completely selfish. Nothing redeeming at all about this guy. He thinks he's owed everything, which in turn contrasts with Simba, who grows up thinking he deserves nothing for what he's done. And thus, it makes that hero's journey to overthrow Scar all the more satisfying. Shan Yu in Mulan, this awful, horrific looming threat who wants to lay waste to China. An unstoppable force, capable of defeating the army again and again and again, showing no mercy, killing everybody, nobody can stop him, except for Mulan, who over the course of the film has proved herself the equal of any man. But now she has this one final hurdle to jump. How about Clayton from Tarzan? Dude's willing to do anything to get those gorillas, to kill some, capture some specimens to take back home. And so yeah, you see these characters, they have a bit of an edge to them. They're darker, less morally ambiguous, just straight up villains. They suck. Yeah, some have depth, some are frightening or funny or whatnot, but they're not trying to subvert your expectations, or rather, they're not trying to make them any deeper than they need to be. And the things they do in their eventual fates, they're often very dark, especially for the Renaissance era ones. Jeez, look at that. They take no prisoners. We have murders. We have so many murderous characters. We have villains dying in horrible ways. I mean, look at Clayton here. Jesus! You wouldn't see that in the current crop of films. I don't think you'd ever see something like that in a kid's film ever again. But regardless, you would still see these fully terrible, irredeemable asshole characters.
Want to know something else? I've never liked your spinach puffs. Never!
That's it. She's going down.
They crop up right into the next boom period in the revival. We're talking Dr. Facilier from Princess and the Frog, Mother Gothel from Tangled, Turbo from Wreck-It Ralph even, Prince Hans from Frozen, the Professor from Big Hero 6, the Deputy Mayor from Zootopia. Now some of these, yes, they're twist villains and they're there to subvert your expectations, and by doing so, they kind of take the focus off themselves and let the heroes grow on their own. But once they are revealed, and in hindsight, their actions shape the plot, once you realize they're revealed to be these terrible, terrible characters, utterly repugnant pieces of garbage, willing to use violence to get their way, no regard on who they've hurt, or if they have to kill anybody, and thus it's compelling to watch them, but also it's very, very cathartic to see the hero finally get one over on them, to defeat them. That's satisfying to see them win the day, and I think it improves the quality of the film overall, and enhances your enjoyment. But I do think we've started to lose that quite a lot in recent times. Instead of having these darker villains who do dark things and have equally dark endings, I feel like over the last 10 years or so, maybe the last 15, they have slowly softened them up. I do think there was an appetite for something new. Instead of the classical hero and villain dynamic, there was a big push for nuance, more abstract, antagonistic forces. Prince Hans is the villain of Frozen, that's true, but he's hardly the focus. That was the start, really. Then they did it again for Zootopia. Moana, that had a villain fake out. You think that this big monster is going to be the villain, but instead, it's just a journey of growth for both Moana and Maui. Frozen 2, it's also a journey of reconciling one's family history and past. There's no real villain aside from their granddad, but he's long dead. Raya and the Last Dragon. For me, it did a very half-hearted villain redemption, which I thought sucked and tanked the ending of the film, but from what I've seen, people seem to like it, so it is what it is. Encanto's main villain doesn't exist because the villain is generational trauma. It's not an actual person. They can't interact with it. Strange World, it's all misunderstandings. And then Wish. Wish, they did try to do the old formula, but they bungled it, didn't they? So I guess we'll start there with Wish, because that's a different case than some of the others here that I mentioned. I really don't understand whatever they were trying to do here. They tried to have the best of both worlds. They wanted that dastardly villain who does terrible things, and in this instance, those terrible things is trying to maintain a monopoly over the wishes of people, deciding what wishes get granted and when, but also stripping them of the knowledge of those wishes so they can't pursue them independently, keeping them all for himself, and thus trying to inhibit on their free will. And I will admit that's pretty dastardly, but they did not lean in hard enough, and so it falls flat. Especially since they also try to give this dude some storyline justification with his previous kingdom from when he was a boy being destroyed. And so he doesn't want it to happen again, and he has trauma, I get it. But they don't dive into it too much, so you don't really get more. And on top of that, he doesn't really do anything all that heinous to make you really hate him. So he couldn't elevate what was a weak story and a weak protagonist. And so the movie ends up feeling kind of bland and ultimately shit, and doing shit. did not do well at all. Then you have stuff like Strange World, which, well, without a strong villain to create drama within the story, it all just floats on by. There's a lack of narrative focus, and the heroes, well, they felt the same way, unfocused. It was just a bad film in general. And yet, I feel like it could have been saved. It felt like the whole film was building up to this big betrayal sequence where the family has to band together against the crew. A sequence they ended up half-arsing and walking back instantly, with it all being a big misunderstanding. Nah, bungled villain. I had a similar problem with Raya and the Last Dragon, where it felt like they spent the whole film building up these villains as pieces of trash that caused this worldwide apocalypse, only to do a switcheroo at the end and have this character who's hunted Raya for the whole film be the true savior after all. Ugh, once again, trash. And whilst I do think that this film is not the worst of the bunch, I think it's indicative of a wider problem with Disney lately. The studio seems unable to successfully write a compelling villain in the way they used to, and the quality of their films is suffering as a result. Films like Encanto, with no central villain. They have the potential to be great, and Encanto's great, but a lot of stories can't be carried by their themes in the way that Encanto was. They need strong characters, and Disney seems unable to properly harness this archetype as of late. When was the last true Disney piece of shit villain? One that was fully designed as being irredeemable garbage, dark, vicious, cruel, with no upside. Was it Deputy Mayor Bellwether? 2016? 8 years ago? It's just, at some point they have to grasp it again, because it's what their films are missing. Magnifico, if handled better, could have improved Wish immensely. Maybe not made it the best film, but better than it was. The crew being villains in Strange World to carve out more conflict than just that boring Family Feud storyline would have improved the film immensely. Not every story can be abstract or about emotions. Sometimes the classic works for a reason. Good versus bad, hero versus villain, those are classic archetypes and they've been built up over centuries. And when you're staring down so many box office bombs in a row as Disney is, I reckon going back to the old kind of stuff that made your studio a titan, that might be the best strategy. But what do I know? I'm just a YouTuber, right? And so with all that being said, these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of what I've had to say? You agree with me? Maybe not. Maybe you think I'm delusional. I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.